So I'm going to ask both the Premier and Darrell about I just want to also let people know that the federal government has provided each of the Northern Territories hundreds of millions of dollars under the bilateral agreement that will allow us to invest in our infrastructure. So in the development of this Arctic policy framework that you spoke of, Premier, how do you hope that you'll see investment in this critical infrastructure, transformative infrastructure that you spoke of in the next 10 years?
Thank you very much for the question. And that process has already started. We've seen significant investment by the federal government and ourselves. And our challenge is finding the way forward. We are looking to becoming, I guess, focusing on transforming to a new economy. We recognize that we have all these resources, so we can't get away from not investing in developing the resources that we have, so we see that as a large part. We feel that we need to significantly diversify our economy so that we move away from a boom and bust mentality. We need significant innovation if we want to move into high-tech knowledge economy, artificial intelligence. So that's one of our biggest challenges, is how do we bring that type of economy, manufacturing, what have you, to remote, isolated territory that are separated by vast distances in a very high cost environment. And also, obviously, infrastructure. We're looking at the traditional types of infrastructure like roads. 33 communities, probably 20 of them don't have all the weather road access. And so it's very expensive, like in mining, for example, to build a mine in the Northwest Territories is probably about 6 to 10 times more expensive than to build one in Ontario or Quebec. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. And so I think with the Arctic policy framework, the Government of Canada has expanded the definition of Arctic to include Newfoundland, Quebec, Manitoba, and also our view is if we can have the lead in writing our own chapter as to what we think should be done in concert with the federal government would be the way to go. So thank you.
Actually, what you're saying provides an excellent opportunity, because we're talking, there was a discussion the other day about we need to build tomorrow's infrastructure today, and if we're going to be building 21st century infrastructure, we have a largely clean slate, and so if we're talking about building roads and other types of infrastructure, I would say the way we can get towards AI and conventional infrastructure is thinking through, there's now smart infrastructure and building infrastructure that is very much driven by AI and is built into it. And that could be one way to create both infrastructure and a knowledge economy in the North.
So, Darrell, since we're highly Indigenous in the North, I'd like to for you to share how supportive our Indigenous communities are for development, and what role and involvement do you believe that we want to play in having that type of infrastructure that we know that we have. The Premier spoke about 25% of revenue going into the communities. So, Darrell, do you want to share with us the role Indigenous people have to play?
Yes, thank you, Madeleine. When I look at the North, the Northwest Territories, 1.2 million square kilometers, and you look at the Yukon and Nunavut all together, we make up over 40% of the landmass of Canada. and with a small population and a majority indigenous population in the north, there's been a lot of discussion, and more so focused on maybe looking to the future economy being transformative rather than just transactional. The Denedeh leadership a number of years ago passed a historic resolution agreeing and indicating to the business community, the indigenous business community, that we should move ahead and look at developing resource corridors for export of the natural resources in the north, because we're so well endowed in the oil and gas and the mining and the natural resources of the north here. And the timing is perfect because Prime Minister of Canada, really came out and said there's no relationship more important than the one with Indigenous people. And moving forward, we're looking at Indigenous-led corridors. We're looking at not working in silos, as many of us have done in terms of business and or the politics, because that environment is gelling and is starting to come together with Article 32 of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, the political will of the federal and the territorial government and the indigenous governments, and saying, okay, how can we actually work together and benefit not only economically, but the social benefits that do come with it to meet the high cost of living in the Arctic and to meet the housing requirements of our community. So very, very important, and it provides the federal government the needed assistance to accelerate and actualize its promises on infrastructure development and reconciliation.
Thank you. In Alaska, the Iñupiat actually have been investing in public infrastructure for many years. Nagruk, could you share some examples of successful partnerships and where your Indigenous funding helped realize the much-needed public infrastructure in your region?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for allowing me to be part of this panel. I really appreciate it. One of the examples that comes to mind, I know we don't have a lot of time right off the bat, is with respect to, in our community of Ukpeaġvik, we have a long history of supporting research. It was since back to 1881, and it continues to this day, and part of that was getting us the infrastructure required to be able to do that productively. And for a long time, we were working with buildings that were built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and it became apparent that we needed to improve that in order to continue to provide the level of support required to have a robust research program in the United States. So the research community came together within the community, and they designed kind of a building, and they built the Biotic Research Center in Ukpeaġvik that is run by the Ukpeaġvik Iñupiat Corporation. It was funds earmarked from the government, turned over to the local indigenous community to operate, and we still operate that today, and it has been successful to this day. So,
Thanks. I'm going to hand my next question over to Scott, and I just want to start by pointing out a recent, Financial Times article that spoke about the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board, which manages one of the world's largest pension schemes. And the article was stating how it plans to more than double the proportion of assets it allocates to China over the next 7 years. And as we're saying, the North American Arctic has many of the characteristics of an emerging market. However, the North American Arctic is very far off the radar of, I would say, almost all pension plans and pension funds, as well as even the major banking institutions. And at the same time, ironically, we're having a hard time finding capital to the north, and so the northern communities and the territories themselves are looking to China to actually provide the capital that's needed, and Canada does have its own strategy for the Arctic. And so my question then, I guess, to you is, what do the Canadian pension funds need in order to be able to put a portion of their assets in the north? And what do you see as some important steps for building, kind of an internal infrastructure strategy within institutions themselves, and relating to that, what might the federal government be able to do, either through incentives or other mechanisms that could, help the major financial institutions get some of their capital up north?
Thanks, Jessica, and great question, and I could probably do a full session on it for an hour or two if we wanted to go through that. First off, I think in the comparison of our pension plan versus the pension plans like CPPIB, which is the one that Jessica mentioned, or our Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, or OMERS, which is the Ontario Municipality Pension Plan. Those are all very, very large plans. They have in neighborhood of $600 to $800 million, $1 billion under management. So what they're looking for is large projects, and they've actually gone outside of Canada, which is a little bit ironic because now Canada's actually looking, especially in the north, to look to China for investments. Our pension plan is of a size that we're looking for, I'll call them medium-term, medium-sized investments, and we are going to be looking internally to Canada as part of our, I'll call it, emerging market strategy, where it's really not really an emerging market, it's more of a domestic market strategy that we're going to be looking for. The opportunity that we see in the Arctic is significant, and just even over the last day and a half and talking to individuals throughout the sessions, as well as learning a lot more about the people on this panel, the opportunity is significant for us. We can look at it as we start to see commonality and common threads, not only across the territories, but also with Alaska, because there is a common thread there through the indigenous population, that when those things start to work in harmony, as well as a federal view that they're putting their importance on it through our infrastructure bank, then that's when I think private equity is going to take a closer look at the opportunities that are there. The other piece I think that's very, very important is our plan really focuses around innovation. And there's a lot of plans out there that talk about innovation, but they don't really do much about it. And we're starting to actually implement a lot of programs within our plan to actually harbor, foster, and cultivate innovation. If there isn't more of an innovative population than the Arctic to survive and do what they do within Canada, I don't know if there's another one around. And just some of the examples that I hear from, again, the counterparts here, it's a very, very innovative way and place to do business. So our investment thesis, as we're going to start looking at it closer and closer, is how can we partner with the territories, with the indigenous community, with the federal government, and really take the leverage for a public-private partnership.
I'm glad that you spoke of the need to have that sort of harmony in that plan. So, Premier, I know that you meet quite regularly with your counterparts in Nunavut and Yukon, and probably even have meetings with Alaska. What value do you see, similar to the Northwest Territories summit that you just having a pan-Canadian or pan-North American infrastructure, northern plan, in which we can see investment companies wanting to actually assist us and build that much-needed infrastructure?
Well, my experience has been that working with Yukon and Nunavut has put us in a very good situation. When all three territories work together, we are able to accomplish a lot. We're able to work very well with at every governmental level. We get together as northern premiers probably 2 or 3 times a year. We usually meet before the western premiers meet, and we usually meet before the Council of the Federation, which is all of the premiers of Canada, and also before we have First Ministers meetings with the Prime Minister. So we've usually worked together in almost every area. Some of the large federal initiatives that were imposed on all of the provinces and territories, I think that the 3 northern territories work very well in areas like climate change and introducing carbon pricing. For us, it was very difficult because we already live in a high-cost environment, and to see more costs added on was very difficult for us. But we were able to find a way forward. Same with cannabis legislation, where legalizing cannabis in Canada, in the north, we have a lot of problems with addictions, so it was difficult, but we found a way forward. We always work very well with Alaska. Whenever I used to go to Alaska 4 or 5 times a year, the governor of Alaska and ourselves would always say we're both long ways from our federal capitals, so we need to find ways to work together. And a lot of the challenges that Alaska faces is we have the same issues. They both had moratoriums in the Beaufort Sea. They're both trying to find ways to transport oil and gas to Asian markets, because we know that's where the demand is, rather than going to north of 48 in the United States. So we have a lot of common issues, and when people with common issues work together, we usually can find a way forward. So thank you.
I'm guessing I'll ask both of you. Do you see any opportunities or mechanisms for the Indigenous corporations to find ways to start working together in a greater capacity?
Okay, I can start. Yes, and I think as Premier mentioned, more and more the Indigenous community and Northerners are starting to work together, and part of that discussion is creating an investment community that focuses on, because there's never really been a significant of infrastructure dollars or monies to reach the Northern Indigenous communities and businesses. So it's not new. We do have Indigenous businesses that work together across the 3 territories in terms of maintaining existing infrastructure, the little that's there. But to make a difference, we have to go beyond the status quo and stimulate and incentivize private equity and really clearly get focused on what the priorities are. And more that discussion is happening between the territorial governments and the Indigenous governments in the north. Because investing is like investing in, emerging markets, and we think that the north is a safe emerging market compared to, other global locations.
The Premier pointed out that when you have a common issues, you can kind of come together and attack those issues and work your way out of them. And I think that the Indigenous people of the North have been a great example of that for thousands of years. And the reasons we've been able to thrive up there is because we work together. Our corporation, our board of directors has asked our president to increase the relationships with other Indigenous communities, not only within the state of Alaska, but outside of that. So we are very committed to helping where we can, asking for help if we need it. And like you said, we just need to identify those same issues and work towards a common goal.
Perfect. I'm going to open up one second. I just have one question to ask Scott very quickly. Given the interest coming from the Indigenous corporations and also from the territories, would the financial sector be willing to kind of be the ones to to go out there and start trying to make things happen if the federal government is not going to be as quick to get out the gate.
I think so, and I know we're running short on time. If there is those foundational elements that are put in place, which is going to make 3P or public-private partnerships work, those are the things that, at least from our investment standpoint, need to be in place. And I think the other part of that, and it's something that we're currently working on with Arctic 360, is around an internship program where we're bringing future leaders from the north down into the financial district within Toronto and working with our fund, with one of the major banks, with a bond rating service and one of the audit houses. And we'll be doing that to develop human capital versus private capital. And that human capital will then have the network, the experience, and the understanding for when they're going out to try and secure investments and bringing that back into the north. So again, that's those relationships and that networking will be another foundational item that we would want to build on.
I'm really sorry. Please come ask a question right now. Oh, you're there. Okay, sorry,
would it be possible to just put a question here?
Sure.
My name is Iqaluit Petersen from DTU Space. DTU is the Technical University of Denmark. One piece of infrastructure that we have not discussed yet is the communications. I think it's very important to ensure that we have broadband communications to every part, and that probably means satellites. So I'd like to hear your view on this piece of communications infrastructure. Thank you.
Oh, well, maybe I could start. As a government, we just finished building a Mackenzie Valley fiber optic link all the way down to Mackenzie, right up to Iñupiat. We spent $170 million to connect all the communities up and down the valley. Most of you don't know that Iñupiat is the second best place in North America to track satellites, and I think we have about 6 or 7 satellite tracking facilities, mostly from European countries, Germany, Sweden, and so on. And when they started expanding, they said if we had the fiber optic link, there were probably about 30 to 35 satellite tracking facilities in Iñupiat. So we've invested a lot of money in fiber optics, and I think within the next year, every community in Northwest Territories will have cell phone services. So it's costs a lot of money, but I think we're almost there.
I know that we're running out of time. I think there, just to sort of add, is that fiber is starting to happen up to Barrow, Alaska, all the way around. We have Yukon relatively well fibered up. Fiber is coming into northern portion of Quebec on the western Hudson Bay, but Nunavut is still yet to be fibered, and hopefully it will be in the future. But those are the type of critical pieces of infrastructure, so transportation, communications, energy, roads, ports. The list is quite endless, and we definitely know we have those needs, and there is the federal funding, there is the provincial territorial funding, there's Indigenous funding, and there's the investment world. The main thing is getting us all together in the same room and making that happen. So I'd like to thank everyone, because I know that we're done the session, and I'd like to especially thank our panelists for sharing their thoughts, and I'm sure that if you have any questions specific to any of them, you can find them at the end of this session. So thank you.